Welcome to the next podcast with Jay Cookingham, a heartfelt journey through grief, loss, and healing. After the devastating loss of his wife, Christine, Jay shares his raw, honest reflections on navigating life without her. This podcast explores the power of grief as a medicine that teaches resilience, invites lament, and leads us to discover God's presence during sorrow. With grace and vulnerability, Jay offers hope and encouragement to those walking through grief, reminding us that we're not alone on this journey of healing.
Hello and welcome to the next podcast. Conversations about navigating, embracing, exploring, and ultimately learning to trust as we journey forward with grief and loss. I'm your host, Jay Cookingham, and this is episode 7 and part 2 of honoring memories and finding hope in the holidays. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I encourage you to go back and check it out. It's where I share my personal journey about navigating grief during the holiday season while still honoring the memory of my wife, Christine. Today's episode is extra special to me because I have a special guest with me. My oldest daughter, Sarah Cookingham, is here with me in the studio. Sarah has graciously agreed to join me for a heartfelt conversation. You know, we have these all the time, but I'm excited to share her perspective on navigating grief during the holidays. And I felt it was really important to hear the female heart on this podcast. I wanted Sarah to share her personal journey with sorrow and grief, and maybe some reflections on watching her dad and her siblings walk through their own grief during this time. This is really a meaningful moment for both of us, and I hope it will offer encouragement and inspiration to you as well. Sarah, thank you so much for being with me here today. It means a lot to me that you're here to be able to talk, like we have multiple conversations at home and talking about many different subjects, but especially recently about the holidays and how to do the holidays different. So I just really thank you for being with me here and on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dad.
So here's the thing. The holidays were such a big deal for Mom, and she had such a gift for making them feel special and meaningful for all of us. That's one of the reasons why this time of year can be challenging, since she passed away in December of 2019. And I'd like to first ask you, how do you, it's almost 5 years now, how do you personally approach the holidays now? How do you navigate this mix of grief and joy?
Well, it's definitely still a work in progress. I feel I still want to honor Mom through the holidays. I still want to celebrate the holidays with our family. It was not only important to her, but one of the ways that she showed her heart to her family and the people around her, her generosity, her excitement, her hospitality were evidenced very clearly during the holiday season. And so in her memory, that is something that I wish to continue to do. And going forward, like it is almost the 5-year mark, has been challenging to find ways to do that while still, at the same time, for me personally, not wanting to celebrate anymore just because of how difficult the holidays are emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a wonderful insight there. When you were thinking about, you said something to me the other day that was, really striking. And you mentioned that you felt the pressure of being the new heart of the family, especially considering how to celebrate holidays and special days. You said that you feel like you have to make sure everyone stays connected to each other. And that's quite a chore since all your siblings live in other states. But can you unpack what you meant? Because that sounds like a lot of pressure to me.
Yeah, again, Mom made the holidays. She made our home this warm, inviting place. She made sure that everybody's favorite foods and cookies and pies were available. She invited people in who had no place to go. And that was such a beautiful example for me. And going forward with our family, who is spread across the East Coast a bit, it's important for me that we all do still have those times together. And not just to remember her, but in celebration of the fact that we are still here. And I want there to be connection between certainly all of us with you, Dad, and also with all of our siblings, and then their prospective families. And sometimes I think I do take on things that I probably shouldn't, but that's something that's very important to me, because if Mom was still here, she would still be doing that.
Do you think that's just a daughter thing, that, to follow your mom's example of making the holidays special? Because I'm wondering if there's something to encourage other dads who are widowers to be sensitive to what a daughter might be feeling responsible for.
It certainly could be. I mean, again, it's not to make generalizations about people. I'll just speak from my own relationship with Mom, that she made our home such a wonderful place to be. And so that is something that I see, that there's a hole now. She left a hole in so many ways. And it might be for other families who have also lost their mother, their wives, that is a similar experience that they might be having during this holiday season, that the primary magic maker, so to speak, is missing, and someone else feels like they need to step into that role.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to navigate, I think, for dads too, because, your mom was really so good at rescuing the holidays for me. She's the one that rescued Christmas for me, and the one that made Christmas come alive again, even before we had any of you guys running around, which, of course, made it even more special. So for a dad who may have, I have all older children. All you guys are much older than some widowers who have young kids still. And so I'm just wondering if the pressure of making the holiday special falls directly on the remaining parental unit, or should it be dispersed throughout the family if possible?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It is different for our family, since we all of your children are adults. It would be very different if we were still small, or some of us were, since there's an age gap between the oldest and youngest in our family, for sure. Again, I think some of the things that people don't talk about with grief is that there is so much pressure to try to get some sense of normal, try to have some kind of, obviously it's glaringly obvious that the person who is lost is no longer with us, but let's try to pick ourselves up and kind of, maybe paint over the cracks a little bit. Yeah. And, I'm just remembering our first Christmas without Mom, since she died just a little bit before Christmas. Where we were all still home, or almost all of us, and I kind of just made the idea, let's all just watch our favorite movie and we'll just eat food all day. And I, as a way to salvage Christmas, because nobody felt like celebrating. I don't think anyone bought any gifts. So the tree was up, but that was about it. And it so didn't feel like Christmas, but it felt good to have a plan of some sort instead of just wallowing the day away, even though I know I was wallowing anyway.
Well, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, you were really good at trying to intentionally get us to do something that would resemble somewhat of a celebration, somewhat of something that we would do on a Christmas day after all the presents were open, and in the yummy breakfast Christmas cinnamon rolls and that Mom would make, and we would just sit around and just kind of like watch a holiday movie together, and and just enjoy that. And so that's really an important point here, is it's hard but how to be intentional about celebrating that moment, whatever that moment is. That's a difficult thing to do, but so crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Grief is it's an explosion going on in your life. And so to find any sense of normalcy or something to hold on to during that time, even if it's as simple as we're all going to sit down and watch a movie, and this is what we're doing together right now. Or we're all going to go, for a walk right now, or we're all going to this, we're going to try to keep, you've kept the tradition going of giving us an ornament every Christmas, which is something Mom, you guys together, but Mom put in our stockings every year, and you've kept that going. So there's these little elements of normalcy of, okay, this is what we used to do. It can never be like how we used to do it again, but we can still slowly, step by step, keep going forward.
Yeah. And it's trying to find that balance and not really even so much balance, it's more and more like harmony, of how things flow together. Because even, going into our 5th year and actually our 6th Christmas without Mom, it is, and everyone getting older and everyone dispersing over the country and having their own lives. And, as a dad, it is, it was important for me to find something that I could continue that was, I think, simple and easy to incorporate into everyone's life. And everyone still puts up a Christmas tree, and the Christmas ornament thing was something that your mom and I did when we were a young couple. This is something that we said, we couldn't afford much when we were a young married couple, but we could afford ornaments, and so that was and we just extended that to you guys when you guys came around and brightened up our day. It was important. So I know we jumped right into the holidays, and I kind of want to back up a little bit, if you don't mind. What has been your biggest challenge in this grief journey? How have you dealt with the loss of your mom over the past 4, now almost 5 years? How has your faith been challenged? Just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. It's definitely, and this is going to sound so cliche, but it's been a journey. It is definitely something I never wanted to go through and experience. And then grief has also been one of the biggest teachers in my life. I would say that my faith, my relationship with God, although it was tested severely through this time, He has gotten me through. He has always been faithful and has stayed true through the storms of this grief, losing my mom, losing my best friend, watching her suffer and then ultimately die, and watching my family and you lose your best friend. It's painful every single day. That pain doesn't ever go away. I think it shifts in and out of focus is what I would say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's numb. Sometimes it's extremely just brutal. One of the last things that Mom said to me in the hospital was that I had to keep going because I told her I couldn't live without her. And I go back to that so many times, that she would want me to keep going. Yeah. And sometimes that keep going is crawling forward, and sometimes it's taking a few good steps, and man, I hit a stride and it's great, and then I stall out. And all I can say is that God has been faithful through that. I think I have changed for the better through this experience. There certainly is no going back, so there is only going forward.
True. Yeah. So that we talk about this quite a bit, that Mom was your best friend, and she was my best friend too. So losing my best friend, you losing your best friend, they have overlap, but they're really a different experience. Yeah. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about what it feels like? Because you didn't just lose your mom, which is something to mourn all in itself, but you lost your best friend. You mind riffing on that for a little bit?
Yeah. I think it's a different kind of loss that I bump into every single day. There's, I long for the comfort of a mother. I long to ask her questions and get her advice as an older woman and as the person who, knew me best and raised me. And then there's the friend aspect of, I want to text her when I did something cool at work.
Yeah, right.
Or when I see, her favorite car or her favorite bird, or,
Yeah.
I work in landscaping and I see so many beautiful plants that I know she would just adore.
She would love, yeah.
And I want to send her pictures, and then I go to open my phone and I know she won't get them. And, her and I used to have tea dates, and I don't have anyone to have tea dates with. And so there's this other element of the comfortableness and the accessibility that I had, having her as my friend, and I didn't have to explain myself. She knew me.
True.
Although she loved hearing my explanations too.
Yeah.
But there's another ache that goes into that I. And again, when events come up and things, we were a good team. Her and I were in the kitchen together, and we would plan things together. And I would help her with the hosting and and to me that was that was even more fun sometimes than the actual day itself. Was all the prep work and the conversations and the listening to music. While we were baking pies and stuff. So learning how to navigate life and still do some of the things that used to bring me joy while doing them with her, and learning to do them on my own is very challenging.
Yeah. And, for me as a widower, and yes, so I lost my wife, but I also lost my best friend. So a lot of the same things, Mom and I were best friends before we got married, we were one of the, we worked on staying best friends throughout our marriage, and not always perfect, but that's what we really wanted to be friends too, along with all the other things that marriage, brings to the table. We enjoyed being married, we enjoyed being a couple, and we enjoyed being brother and sister in the Lord, and that, so many different levels. But, I do miss my best friend for a lot of the same reasons that you just mentioned. Just that she knew who I was. I didn't have to really explain myself. She knew my moods and temperaments. She understood my moods and my temperaments, and she gave herself willingly to that man, to her friend. And we would, I just loved making her laugh. Just her laugh was contagious, and it was a blast of joy. And so, just losing our best friend is a different kind of level of grief. So, I'm wondering, what would you say to people? Is there something that you wish people did or said, especially during the early days of losing your mom and your best friend, and actually your sister in Christ, and is maybe they don't know really how to deal or what to say about grief, but what would have helped you earlier in your journey?
I think the number one thing that would have helped and would still help is for the people who are around us, who wanted to support us, and listening, you might find yourself in a similar position. The letting go of the need to fix it.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And being willing to be uncomfortable with the person who's grieving. I think I didn't know how to ask for it at the time, but I just wanted somebody to sit with me.
Yeah.
And just let me be, if I was numb, if I was angry, if I was crying, and any of those things, without saying anything, without giving me platitudes, or we've talked about this, scripture verses, or saying, well, at least your mom's not suffering anymore, or at least she's in a better place, or, well, you got 29 years with her, so that was great, or any of those things that people say, and because most of the time they don't know what to say and they're uncomfortable, but just being willing to acknowledge the fact that this has been a devastation, and you're reeling when this happens.
Yeah.
You're not yourself. You're not thinking so clearly. You're in shock.
And you said you don't really know what you need, but you know what you don't need.
Exactly. I mean, what I need is my mom, and nobody
Right.
can give me that. So I don't know what I need, but I know I don't need a pat on the shoulder and to say, well, eventually you're just going to have good memories of her. Well, that still hasn't been true to this day, And I think one of the kindest things that someone ever did do, which was probably 6 months after the fact when they found out that my mom had passed, was just acknowledge that I was in pain, and that's it. They stopped right after that. That just to say,
You mean they didn't fix you?
no,
No?
they
They didn't fix you?
They didn't even attempt to fix me, which was so. What it did was it gave me permission to realize, oh, I am still in pain, and I don't have to get over this pain. I'm not going to get over this pain, and that's not a defeatist statement. That's just true. She was so important to me. Of course, I would be in pain.
Yeah.
From her loss.
Yeah, you don't have to excuse that pain away, right?
Pain is not the enemy here.
Right. So, I often use this analogy when talking about people sharing their grief, and I say, if it's kind of like you got to let people purge, you got to let people throw up. Mm-hmm. If one of your kids was throwing up in the bathroom, you wouldn't walk into the bathroom and tell them to stop throwing up. It wouldn't work, but you wouldn't tell them that anyway, and nor would you put your hand over their mouth to try to silence or to keep them from throwing up.
Yeah.
But we do that emotionally to people.
Mm-hmm.
And how damaging is that when someone's ready to talk about their grief, ready to share some feelings, and they think they have an opportunity. People ask, well, how you doing? Tell me how you feel. And you start to do that, but then you see the look in their eyes that, oh my goodness, I didn't want to go down this path.
Yeah.
But how important it is to let people purge, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. It's so crucial. I don't think people realize how important it is. I do believe it gets overlooked because, again, we're kind of focused on solutions. Like, all right, you're upset. Well, let me fix the problem. And that works for some areas of life, And however, grief is an entirely different entity. And it is I believe is one of the greatest gifts we can give to each other, to be a witness to each other's pain. To, what my friend did for me, that with just that statement of, well, yeah, you're traumatized by your mother's death. You're in pain still. It's like, it gave me that acknowledgement to go, oh yeah, actually I am. And, and that's how it should be. I don't have to, muster up some kind of false bravado or be like, yeah, it's no big deal. It's a small grief as composed to, no, I watched my mother die, and that was devastating. And no, my life isn't over, and I still believe that God is good, and I'm supposed to be here, and He has good for me, but this is devastating. And so when we can sit with someone and just acknowledge the fact that not only are they in pain, but all the other emotions that grief brings up, like fear and panic and disillusionment and the stress, like we were talking about pressure before, the stress and pressure of grief, to be able to sit with someone and not be afraid, not pull back, not get that, we've both seen it, that
right.
panic look of, please stop talking, please stop talking. I didn't really want to know about,
thank you.
What happened in the hospital. Like, okay, well, you asked, but all right, I'll pull back now.
Yeah.
And then what that does is then that puts the grieving person in the role of caretaker.
Yeah.
And that puts even more pressure on them. And they should be the ones being taken care of in that situation.
Yeah. And that's just a good point, that the number of times that I felt like I had to comfort the person who was trying to comfort me with the loss of my own wife. It was like, wait a minute here, these roles are reversed. And although she had some very dear friends that I felt like, yeah, I should offer comfort to them because those people meant a lot to Mom. And so in the shared mutual grief at that moment is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a sacred thing. But the number of people kind of outside the circle that come in to try to help, and again, this is not a critique of them. It's just trying to explain some of the feelings that we have. I've spent a lot of time, I think especially early on, I spent more time comforting people about your mom's loss than I did comforting myself about mom's loss.
Yes. Yeah. And as your daughter, that was something that was very frustrating for me personally to see that you had to not only carry the weight of your own loss and then trying to be there for your children and their loss, and like you said, our inner circle of friends and their loss, and then as pastor, our church's loss, since mom was such an integral part of our church family, and then be the comforter and explainer and mediator, maybe we'll say, to other people's grief and their reactions from that. And I think that was, I thought you did an amazing job, but that was painful for me too, because you had enough going on, and as your kid, that was hard to see that, it was just another aspect of grief and death it's really hard to deal with. It's just not fair. And, and that's something you have to face too when you're going through grief. Yeah.
And that's, I'm kind of glad you brought that point up. As a dad, it's hard to watch your kids go through hard times anyways, but to see you guys struggle with your own grief has been really difficult for me because, I'm your dad. I want to rush in. I want to try to help, but grief is sometimes a very lonely business that you have to process. You have to learn how to process it by yourself. At the same time, while needing people to support and being around you. Mm-hmm. So you just touched on it, how difficult it was to watch your dad. So I'm wondering, if widowers might want to lean into this, not understanding a couple of points here that you don't have to be Superman. Mm-hmm. You still have to be vulnerable, but at the same time, you have to kind of tune into what your kids are feeling, not about just their own grief, but watching you go through grief. How difficult is that as a daughter watching their dad? And maybe you can throw your siblings in there and watching them go through it too. Yeah.
It's been extremely challenging because, again, everybody, even though we all experienced the same event, we were all in that room, we all saw it, we are all different people. We all had different relationships with mom, and we all handle things differently in our lives. And then going forward, we handle grief differently. I handle grief so differently now than I did year one or year two or 3 months or the day after. And you don't really know how you're going to handle it in the future either. I think you learn tools and you try to, realize some patterns that you have in yourself, and you get help, and you like we said, you kind of stumble forward. And again, you have to fight that own desire. Like you said, you just want to rush in and fix it. Yeah. And I wish I could make it better for you. It is awful watching your father lose his best friend. And us as kids saw how much you guys loved and chose each other. You were friends. You were best friends. You really enjoyed each other.
Yeah, we did.
Even apart from being married, and you enjoyed being married. That was the other thing. I know very few couples that enjoyed being married as much as you and mom. And so it's been so cruel that you have to live without her. And again, God's not cruel. It's just the situation is awful. And I remember one of the first things you said when we got back from the hospital that night is, you held up your left hand and you said, I'm not married anymore. Yeah. And the devastation in your voice. And as a kid, your dad is your hero, right? Your dad is, if everything's good, which, it was in my life, that, here's this, the patriarch of our family, and we're all standing around you. And I think, at least I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how to comfort my father. Yeah. With this, we've never been through this before. Right. I don't even know how to comfort myself or my younger siblings, I think we all were a little deer in the headlights, maybe even yourself included.
Yes, definitely.
And so a lot of grace, a lot of, again, had to rely on God, still
Yes.
do.
Yeah.
And I think something we've tried to get better on and probably could still improve on is just communication, just trying to check in. How's your day? You having a grief day? You're not having a grief day. And just trying to listen and empathize when you can, because it's one of the greatest humilities, like, to say, I can't make this better for you. I'm so sorry that you're, I hate seeing you cry for mom. And not that I hate seeing you cry. I think it's beautiful but just, I hate that you're in such agony and there's, I can't do anything, It is horrible.
Yeah. It's just, I think it's important for widowers to, for dads especially to pick up on that, because I know that none of you were expecting me to, make it right. But I felt the pressure, not from you guys, just for myself, of being the strong dad. That I'm going to show you the way through this thing, and we're going to attack grief, and we're going to beat it, and we're going to do, we're going to come out victorious, and I might not have said those words, but that certainly was my action. But I was and am to this day devastated about the loss of your mom. Of course I am. That's a no-brainer. But I remember after mom passed and we were all leaving in different cars to go home, that I sat in the parking lot in my Jeep for at least 25 minutes, I think it was, before I could get the courage to come home, because I had to face all of you. And I didn't know what to do, because we always did that together. Even when mom got cancer and we went to the park to talk about it before we came home to tell everybody, we did that together. Yeah. We faced that together. We got strength from each other. And now I was walking into this family that had just lost their mom, and their dad's a wreck, and he's trying to pull it all together to show that he still has faith and he still, believes in God and all that. Yeah, and, it's so much pressure. And then, I remember holding up my son, I'm not a married man anymore. And I'm going, and I look back at it going, well, why did you say that? They know you're not a married man anymore. But it's those kind of things, when you're shocked, even though we were expecting mom to die for a few days, we kind of knew it was going to happen. The shock of that just throws you off. And so that you mentioned, how important are these conversations going forward? You and I we're blessed that we lived, close together, so we can have these kind of conversations on an almost daily basis. We don't always talk about mom, but we do talk about it a lot, and a lot more lately. And I do try to check in with all your siblings, to make sure they're doing okay with just life in general. But about this too, I always ask them about how they're dealing with their grief. How important do you think these kind of conversations among a family are, for various reasons?
Yeah, I think they're extremely important, and yes, they are difficult. I'm more of a stuffer. I'd rather not talk about those kind of things and just, keep calm and carry on. But, whatever you don't express stays in there, and, eventually causes all kinds of mayhem in your system, if not emotionally, then physically and mentally, and certainly relationally. Because again, everybody experiences grief so differently, and there's room for all kinds of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. And, if you're talking about mom too much, then you're making it all about you. Or if you don't talk about mom enough, then you don't care about her. Or there's all this stuff that if you're not communicating, it can seem like, and a lot of people make assumptions, we've both heard you're doing so much better now.
Yeah, right.
Just because, I don't know, we smiled that day or something. Yeah. I'm not really sure what the...
Describe better, please.
Yeah, exactly. But that can happen within your own family, I mean, last week, you had a good day. You told me that you were really kind of excited about some new projects. You always miss mom, but you weren't feeling it, that, like, you were kind of...
There was a moment of joy and feeling God's love that I haven't felt in like 4.5 years.
Right. And when I could tell you were so excited by that when I got home from work, and saw you. And that was so, like, great. And I was so thrilled. And at the same time, like the day was like the complete opposite for me.
you,
Like
yeah.
everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And I was missing Mom so much. It was physically painful. And I felt like I almost couldn't share that with you because I didn't want to ruin. But we had a beautiful conversation. And I think, I mean, you can jump in here. I don't think it ruined it for either one of us.
No.
Because it was just honest.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I've had good days too. And you've had bad days
Yes.
too. And we have a lot of, all kinds in between.
They overlap, but they don't necessarily mean we're sharing the same moment together because we can't. We're different people.
Right. But we could both have empathy and understanding for
Yes.
each other in the midst of that and celebrate and grieve. To see you excited and happy and when you get a project going, and I love seeing that.
Yeah.
The look of excitement in your face and your pep in your step. Like as your child, I adore seeing you that way. Not that you always have to be that way. But
yeah.
it had been a while, and it was really nice that you got this little burst of, and certainly experiencing God's love in a different way is just always a wonderful gift, and so I was so thankful for that.
Yeah.
And I think if you can, and you've talked about this so much the last almost 5 years, if you can embrace the grief, the teaching aspect, the journey aspect of it, instead of fighting it or running away from it or being scared of it, you can hold space for both of those things.
Yes.
I think we had there was no competition.
Nope.
There was no, I didn't have a good, it was just, okay, this is really hard for me today. This is where I am. You're riding high right now, and that's wonderful too. And
Yep.
that's real life. Real life is pain and real life is joy. And oftentimes those two seriously intermingle. And I think even that is honoring certainly to God, but also to Mom, because she was so good at holding both of those, all the emotions.
Yes,
She wasn't a black or white, one or the other. She could sit with someone in agony and be just as comfortable as, baking cookies and being all happy in the kitchen and giggly like she was. She was able to really glide back and forth between all those experiences.
So even these conversations, and we certainly need to have more of them as a family, because this is still very much a process for us. And 5 years, might sound like a long time to someone, but to us, it feels like 5 minutes ago. In a lot of those days, we feel like we're back in that hospital room, and saying goodbye to the degree that we could at that moment, since she was not alert. But so these conversations going forward are really huge, and just even keeping Mom's memory alive, because Mom was the great communicator.
Yes.
Not perfect, not, but she was she knew how to not just communicate what she was going through, but to make this conversation happen that you felt heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge gift of hers.
Yeah.
I don't know a single person that
Right.
didn't have a conversation with her that, didn't walk away feeling like the most important person in the world, and she was so genuine in that. Yeah. And I think as hard as it is, because it's uncomfortable and because you don't have really control over where it's going to go, because again, sometimes we don't even know how you're feeling until you start, tapping into some of that.
True.
The emotions, the memories, grief is, you've likened it to the ocean many, many times. You don't get to control the ocean.
No.
You just get to jump in and experience it.
Yeah.
And that is often how grief feels as well. I think there are guidelines and tools that certainly
Can help you
can
navigate.
help you, navigate conversations and your own conversations with yourself and, your internal dialogue.
Right. So even in this one, like I said, you and I talk a lot about many different subjects, and this whole we love having conversations about Mom now more so than at the beginning, because both of us were in different places. But I think you've experienced this as well. Sometimes when we actually get to talk about Mom, we're talking about her in this matter-of-factly tone, because we either don't want to enter into our own grief moment at that time, or we feel like the person that we're talking to about Mom is not ready to handle that. So we're kind of like talking about mom from a 10,000-foot level.
Yeah.
You know, almost even on this podcast. I know both you and I have fought back tears a couple of times here just so that we could continue with a dialogue. And not that crying on air would be a bad thing, but we're sensing that we need to keep our composure. How difficult it is for you to talk about mom in that kind of way? How does that mess with your grief, mess with your stuff?
Yeah, it does feel like a disconnect. I often kind of step back from myself when I'm having those conversations and kind of like, what am I doing? I'm talking about the most traumatic, terrible day of my life, and I'm talking about it the same way I talked about what I had for breakfast. It is a disconnect for sure. In the early stages, I think it felt like a dishonor to mom, and now I'm just more curious about what's kind of going on internally, that I still do this, that I still talk about her, and I'm sure elements of it are either self-protection or others' protection, right? I don't want to upset anybody,
right? Or
I don't want someone to get upset or say something that might upset me, so we're just going to keep it very neutral, you know? And a lot of people are more comfortable with neutral, like, oh, good, you're talking about your mom's death and you're not crying. Okay, so that means you're good. So I'm good, right? So we can continue this conversation. I don't need to freak out, right? Whereas if you start breaking down, a lot of people do freak out, one way or the other. It's been rare in my experience that I can go into more emotions with talking about mom and have somebody respond instead of react. In the past, I've either gotten the blank, terrified look of please stop talking, or people will start crying, and then I feel like, I have to comfort them now because I've made them upset.
True.
It's very rare that someone will just sit with me in that emotion and not make it about them and not make it about being comfortable. I think it's an extremely difficult thing. And I'm still learning about myself through that. I'm not sure why I always do it, and I'm trying to get better about it. But
yeah, I do think it's a kind of a natural grief response. Ideal, not as much now. Certainly at the beginning, and I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, with all the paperwork that has to be done when someone passes away. There's too much, but you begin to get into this practice of asking for forms or filling out forms, and people asking you why you want this form, and say, well, my wife passed away. And you say it so matter-of-factly that it begins to sound like, I picked up groceries today. It's like, and then you go back after that little event of your life is over, you start to say, how could I talk about the love of my life in what seems like, it's not really a big deal. But I think it's a kind of a self-protection thing, that we do sometimes just to get through conversations, just to get through dialogue of that has a professional nature to it. Filling out forms is mundane all in itself. And I do think it's just part of that kind of thing where it's self-protection because of the things that you mentioned. We're not sure what the other person's reaction is going to be, and it's safer for us to talk about mom in that way. But it's also good to remember, and I just want to say this, is that it doesn't mean that you love them less. It doesn't mean that you're not honoring their memory or even acknowledging the pain of their loss. It's actually kind of a big acknowledgement that you lost someone, that you're trying to keep it in this normalized thing, thinking that you can control it. So I think it's something like that.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite quotes from a Jane Austen novel is, if I loved you less, I could talk about it more. And I think that's very true for both of us.
That's a real good thought.
It's too deep. And so I don't think it's always a bad thing either. That, that sometimes you just recognize as you're going through that certain people or places or times just aren't the right time or a good time for you emotionally to bring this up to the surface. And then there are times that are, and there have been, I think both of us experienced a few occasions with people or situations, sometimes as a surprise.
Sometimes a real big surprise. And so to keep that kind of thought even in the midst of family conversations, between, the last parental unit, me and my children, and among the siblings, among themselves, to have that kind of grace for yourself first, saying, okay, I it's near the surface as it can get, and I can allow it out at this moment, and to have grace for that in the conversations, not trying to force someone to talk about it when they're not ready, or to try to be as prepared to go into that conversation with each other, and just kind of enjoy is the hard word here, but kind of enjoy that moment together.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And to have direct communication is so crucial. I mean, asking someone, do you want to talk about Mom? Do you want to talk about the day she died? Do you want to talk about how you're handling it right now? And then being okay with the answer. If it's a no, then okay, great. Let's talk about the Mets, or I don't know,
something else.
Something else, right? Or, hey, I would love to go on a walk and maybe see how you're doing about this, but we could also not do that, and that's okay. And like you said, having grace for, because everybody's at a different part of their process, and that changes sometimes, as we've experienced, hourly, minute by minute, sometimes not even days. But having grace is very challenging, but it's so crucial as well. Yeah,
grace is certainly a big thing. I'm loving this conversation, but we're going to break right here and pick up this conversation next week. But for now, God bless you, and thank you for joining us on this special episode of the Next Podcast. I'm hoping that this conversation with my daughter Sarah is blessing you, and that you are finding some encouragement in moving forward during the holidays with some joy and with some focus. Remember, God is good. God is always good. He always answers out of His goodness. Learning to trust His definition of good is crucial to moving forward in our journey.